Hey, welcome back. Today we're going to be looking at a hack-the-box Sherlock. These are designed to test your investigation skills against seemingly real-life scenarios, although that can be a bit contrived. Either way, they're a good way to practice your investigation skills, whether you're a SOC analyst, CTI analyst, or incident responder. Today we're going to be taking a look at a relatively easy one called Brutus, which is a starting point on Hack the Box. I'm going to show you how you can apply the 4 key components that are present in any investigation to this Sherlock. This should help you better understand how and why you need to perform certain steps during an investigation to get to a good answer. Before we get started looking at the Brutus Sherlock, let me walk you through the 4 key evidentiary skills that all investigations require you to complete. First up, we have interpretation. This is all about identifying what relationships exist in the evidentiary data. Say you have a Windows event log with an event ID of 4624. This could tell you that a user is logged into a system. So, a relationship that exists here will be a user logging in to a system. Then we have capability comprehension. What questions can this evidence data help you answer? Again, going back to our example of a Windows event log 4624, it helps us answer when, where, and who logged into a system. Next up, we have collection. How do you plan on collecting this data? For these Sherlocks, the data is provided to us, so it's not a big concern. But in the real world, you need to go out and find this data and collect it and upload it to a platform to analyze, or a tool. This could be an EDR solution that you deploy with an EDR agent, and that pulls the data into the EDR platform you're using for analysis. Or it could be, in our case of Windows event logs, a log forwarder on that Windows endpoint that forwards logs into a SIEM solution where you can then analyze it. Either way, a key skill in investigations is collecting that data, and hopefully you've got this set up beforehand. Then finally, we have manipulation. How are you going to organize and change the structure of the data that you're analyzing so that you can find the answers you're looking for? All of these evidentiary steps exist so that you can create an accurate timeline of events. You can see what happened from end to end of an attack. Using these evidentiary skills, you map events to this timeline to detail who, what, why, and when. This gives you a complete picture that you can then report. Okay, so let's get started with the Brutus Sherlock, and let me walk through how you can apply these 4 evidentiary skills to this challenge. Here, I've logged into the platform and opened up the Brutus Sherlock. Let's get started by reading the case description. In this very easy Sherlock, you will familiarize yourself with Unix auth.log and WTMP logs. We'll explore a scenario where a Confluence server was brute forced via its SSH service. After gaining access to the server, the attacker performed additional activities, which we can track using auth.log. Although auth.log is primarily used for brute force analysis, we will delve into the potential of this artifact in our investigation, including aspects of privilege escalation, persistence, and even some visibility into command execution. To get started, let's download the files and see what we're working with. The zip file is password protected, so remember to copy across the zip password. And then we can extract the files. So we can see we've got an auth.log, a utmp.py file, and a utmp file. But you're probably wondering, what is this data about? What is in these files that will be helpful in my analysis? Well, this is where the interpretation step comes in. What relationships does this evidence data represent? And to understand this, we need to do a bit of research. So let's ask our best friend, AI. Here I've asked ChatGPT to give me a lowdown on what will be in an auth.log file. It shows me where that file is located, and then it indicates successful or unsuccessful logins. Here it lets me know how it can be used during an investigation, so it can be used to spot brute force attacks, spot unauthorized access, detect privilege escalation, trace lateral movement, and correlate with other logs. I imagine this is what we'll be using the WTMP log for. So it's got some tips for analysing this log. So it says we can use the grep utility, which is a built-in utility in Unix for searching through files. We can also use awk and cut to extract information from this file. Alright, that's some great information on the auth.log. Let's take a look at what ChatGPT says about the other log file we found. So this is WTMP. So straight away we see that it is a binary file, not a text file like our auth.log, and this requires a different utility to analyze it, particularly the last command. Again, we can use this file to track logins and logouts, and spot suspicious login durations, or identify logins from unusual IP addresses. So we can use this along with auth.log to correlate some login events. We know what relationships exist in this evidentiary data now. Now, the next question will be, what questions can this evidence data answer? This relates to the capability comprehension evidentiary skill that we went over. So, jumping back to our interpretation of the data, we can see that the auth.log and WTMP files provide us with logins, login attempts, and sudo activity. So, what questions can this answer? Well, thankfully we don't need to come up with these questions by ourselves, because they are present in the Brutus Sherlock. So let's take a look at those questions that are being asked of us in this investigation. So the first question we're asked is about what is the IP address used by the attacker to carry out the brute force attack. This leads us into the manipulation part of our investigation. How can we organise and change the structure of the evidence that we're presented so we can better analyse it? Let's start with the auth.log file in question. Here I've opened the file in VS Code to take a look at what's inside, so we can try and figure out what we can gain from this. Looking through the data, we see some login attempts, some open and closed sessions, see some usernames that have been used to log in, such as root. We see some errors about users who've failed to be logged in. So from this data, and the multiple attempts that we've seen from this one IP address, we can deduce that this will be the IP address of the attacker. But manually looking through log files isn't ideal. It'd be better if we could parse this file. So let's try and find a parser online that we can use to better analyze this file rather than manually looking through it. Looks like we've found one here, so let's give it a go. I'm going to use the UV utility to run this file, because it requires several packages that I don't want to install on my system per se. I'll copy the auth file here so we can analyze it, and then run the parser, again using the UV utility, which allows me to run it in a virtual environment, so I don't need to install these Python packages on my machine. Looks like I might need to make a modification to this file, because it's looking for the built-in auth.log file rather than the one we want to specify. Alright, let's try to run that again. Perfect. So here are the results of our analysis. We see the failed login attempts have been parsed out. A lot of these from the same IP address as we saw in the manual analysis, so we can probably deduce this as the attacker's IP address. We see successful logins, a lot for root and an interesting one for cyber junkie. The IP address count, 1 from this IP address, a lot from this IP address, and the usernames that were used to try and log in, and the location of those IP addresses. That's great. This handy little utility allowed us to parse the auth.log file and find the answer we're looking for. So let's copy this IP address and see if that one is correct. Great start. Alright, so the next question is, the brute force attempts were successful and the attacker gained access to an account on the server. What is the name of that account? So going back to our parse results, we can probably guess that it is this root account, given that that was the only one with a successful login that ended in a T. But perhaps we'll take a look at the WTMP file just to confirm that. Now, there's multiple ways we could try and parse this WTMP file. We could use the last command, and we can see that the first successful login from that malicious IP address was for the root account, or we could use the handy Python script to parse the WTMP file as well. So it looks like it's the root account that was logged in. You can also see this from our parsing of the auth.log file. Looking at successful logins, we have multiple for root, again before this cyber junkie. So let's give root as the answer, and we're correct. The next question is, identify the UTC timestamp when the attacker logged in manually to the server and established a terminal session to carry out their objective. The login time will be different than the authentication time and can be found in the WTMP artifact. So if we go back to the auth.log file and search for that login from root and the IP address of the attacker, we see here that this is a login in our auth.log file. But as it said in the question, this timestamp is different from the actual authentication event in the WTMP file. We want to identify the UTC timestamp. So again, if we hop over to the last command like we did previously, we can use this to get the timestamp, but first we need to set the timestamp variable in our bash shell. So it's the same command, but instead of using the timestamp in the UTMP file or whatever's set on our file system at the minute, we'll specify this specifically with the bash variable tc and set it to UTC. That way we get the timestamps in the UTC format. So let's look for that first login from root with the malicious IP, and it looks like it is this one. So what is the format they want that in? Year, month, day. Awesome, so let's move on to the next question. Task 4 states that SSH login sessions are tracked and assigned a session number upon login. What is the session number assigned to the attacker's session for the user account from question 2? So go back and we'll look at question 2. And this was a brute force using the root user account. So let's hop back to our auth.log file and see where that root username was accepted as a login. Here we see the malicious IP address and that the password was accepted for the root user, and that gives us the new session ID of that user. Alright, task number 5. The attacker added a new user as part of their persistence strategy on the server and gave this new user account higher privileges. What is the name of this account? Well, in our auth.log file, we can see that there is a cyber junkie user being created and that they're being added to the sudo or super users group. In Linux, this allows them to perform high privileged actions. So we'll take that and paste it in as our answer. Awesome. The next question is, what is the MITRE ATT&CK subtechnique ID used for persistence by creating a new account? So we'll hop over to MITRE ATT&CK and we'll look up that ID for that subtechnique. If you don't know, MITRE ATT&CK is a knowledge base of tactics and techniques used by threat actors. These are the specific techniques, commands, or tools that a threat actor will use when they're trying to compromise a system. Creating accounts is a type of persistence mechanism. So we'll look at the persistence techniques. and see if we can find a local account creation under there. Here we see the technique of create account. So now in this main technique called create account, we can expand the sub-techniques, and we see that there's a sub-technique called local account, which is T136.001. We'll click on that to confirm it is the technique we're looking for. And it reads, adversaries may create a local account to maintain access to victim systems. Local accounts are those configured by an organization for use by users, remote support services, or for administration on a single system or service. So we can see that this appears to be related to our attack. As you can see, in Linux, the user add command is used. Let's see if we can spot that. So in the auth.log file, we see the user add command being used with the new username cyberjunkie, and we also see them being added to privileged groups with the user mod command. So it's safe to say that this is the MITRE technique we're looking for. So let's copy that ID and give it in an answer. Awesome, another correct answer. Okay, so the next question is, what time did the attacker's first SSH session end according to auth.log? So from question 2, we know that they logged in as the root user and that their session ID was 37, so we can use this to track their activity and when they logged out. So let's hop back to that auth.log file and we'll try and find that number 37. So we have the session here where they logged in. Now let's see if we can find when they logged out. So looking through, we see session 37 logged out and we see the timestamp 06:37:24. So let's give that a go, see if it's our correct answer. Perfect. So now our final task is the attacker logged into their backdoor account and utilized their higher privileges to download a script. What is the full command executed using sudo? So hopping back over to our investigation and those 4 key components, we can see that the auth.log file allows us to see sudo activity. Those relationships exist in that evidentiary data, so that we can look that up and we can see what script they executed using the sudo command. So how do we manipulate this data to find it? Well, we can just look through our auth.log file and see what sudo commands were run. So let's hop back over to it and let's try and find that login with the cyberjunkie user. So we see them add in the user, we see them logging out, we see accepted password for cyberjunkie, and the start of that new session, which is identified by number 49. Now, what sudo commands do they run? Here we see some sudo commands. What have they run? Well, we see they use the curl utility, which is a well-known lolbin, to execute this limper.sh script. So hopping back over to the question, we see the format they want for that, which is the full command. So let's copy this whole command, see if that gives us the answer. Awesome, we did it. Good job, everybody. So let's walk through what attack steps were carried out here. So we see a brute force attack from this malicious IP address. We saw that in the auth.log file, and we used a custom parser that we downloaded from GitHub to verify that. This is a great little utility, and it allows us to manipulate the data in such a way that we can answer those key questions. So we have the IP address that was malicious, we have users that were logged in, what times they were logged in, and we have all these failed logins attempt indicating a brute force attack. So we saw that they were successful at logging in with that root user account, and we found out what time they logged in using a mixture of the auth.log file and the WTMP file, which, through a bit of research using our friendly ChatGPT, we found out that it records login and logging out events. which is handy if we're trying to track a user logging in and logging out. So we found out what time they logged in. We saw in the auth.log file there was multiple successful logins for the root user from that malicious IP address. We saw one with the session ID 37, which was when they actually performed their malicious actions. And we saw another one for new session 34 from that user. That would be the brute force attempt where they successfully log in and then quickly log out. We saw that they used a persistence strategy where they created a local high privileged account called Cyber Junkie, which related to the MITRE sub-technique T1136001. We also then were able to see when they logged out of that root session and logged back in as that Cyber Junkie account, giving them a backdoor into our Confluence server. And then finally, the auth.log file showed us what sudo commands that new backdoor user ran, and we found that they ran the curl command to download a malicious script onto our system called linper.sh. Awesome. So now we've completed the Brutus Sherlock on Hack the Box. I want to remind you though of the steps that we took to answer these questions and the steps that you can reproduce when you do your own cyber investigations. First up, we have interpretation, so we need to look at what data we have and what relationships exist within that data. Then we have capability comprehension. What questions can we ask of this data and what answers is it likely to give us back? Then we have collection. As I previously said, thankfully Hack the Box do all the collection for us and you can just download the zip file. But in the real world, you might need to use a log forwarder or an agent to collect this data. And then finally, the big skill that is tested with these Sherlocks is our manipulation. Can we organize and change the structure of the data to answer the questions that is being posed? Thankfully, through VS Code, a custom auth.log parser, and the last command line utility, we were able to answer these questions and manipulate the data effectively. I hope you enjoyed this little walkthrough. I'm going to keep doing these and applying these 4 key cyber investigation skills to more Sherlocks so you can see what these look like in practice and get some hands-on experience with cyber investigations. I'll see you then.